Assalamu alaikum. Brothers and sisters, imagine a world where the loudest voices for freedom are also the ones silencing dissent at home and abroad. They stand on the world stage proclaiming to be the guardians of freedom and justice, where champions of human rights fund regimes that trample on them, where nations preach equality but practice discrimination, and at home the streets echo with the cries of the marginalized. This is not a hypothetical scenario. In the words of Nelson Mandela, if there is a country that has committed unspeakable atrocities in the world, it is the United States of America. In the words of Edward Said, the history of colonialism is a history of violence and oppression justified by sounding ideals of human rights. And in the words of Malcolm X, we declare our right on this earth to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day. Today, I will attempt to unravel the widely held belief that international human rights law serves as a universal, unbiased standard of justice, a belief that we have all at some point thought to be a yardstick for decent human behavior and a bedrock of justice. However, how many of us have ever questioned whether this notion is as noble as it is claimed, or whether it could merely be a tool in a larger political game? So what are modern human rights law? Human rights, as defined by the West, refer to the fundamental rights and freedoms that belong to every individual, highlighting the principles of dignity, equality, and respect. The establishment of the United Nations in 1945 was a significant milestone for the West. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, was adopted in 1948, it was celebrated as a monumental achievement for humanity, which set forth a common standard for all people as they saw fit. This foundational document paved the way for subsequent treaties, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, and the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, further elaborating on the rights and protections affording to individuals. Together, these instruments, in theory, provide a framework for safeguarding human rights law globally. Now, let me draw your attention in layman terms as to what this means. It means a group of people, mainly secular capitalists from the West, decided for the whole world post-Second World War what they think should be the ideals of behavior and what fundamental rights an individual should have, and they drew a treaty on it and founded institutions such as the ECHR, International Criminal Court, ICC, ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and so on to defend it. However, as we delve deeper, we discover a different narrative and many contradictions. Western nations, the self-proclaimed champions of human rights, are found time and again to twist these so-called rights to fit their own agendas rather than uphold true justice. Take the UK, for instance. It embraced the UDHR with its Human Rights Act in 1998, yet here we are today witnessing political factions within the UK pushing to undermine those very protections. It seems less about justice, but more about political convenience. Because of time, I cannot go into details or cite more examples in this presentation. I will look beyond the headlines at some global events, like the Bosnian genocide, the devastating sanctions on Iraq, Syria, and the ongoing Palestinian genocide, and the events unfolding in Bangladesh. And the double standards, not to forget, at home in the US and Europe. Through these well-documented examples, we will shine a light on the cracks in the West's human rights record and narrative, and juxtapose this with the Islamic perspective, where adal, justice, transcends geopolitics and is grounded in divine principles. Let's take a closer look at a few examples where Western human rights rhetoric has fallen apart. Consider the Bosnian genocide for a second, a horrifying chapter in Europe's history. Between 1992 and 1995, over 100,000 Bosnian Muslims were massacred. The West's response? Slow, indifferent, and politically driven, not by law. Intervention only began when it became politically advantageous, 3 years into the crisis. Even the International Court of Justice was criticized for its inaction, despite clear violation of international law. Let's now turn to Iraq and the devastating sanctions imposed after the Gulf War. From 1990 to 2003, Iraq suffered economic collapse, healthcare crisis, and severe food shortages. Hundreds of thousands of children died due to malnutrition and preventable diseases. Despite this humanitarian disaster, the West did little beyond implementing the corrupt Oil for Food program. And yet, in 1996, US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright famously said the death of 500,000 children was, quote, worth it. This callousness, all for political objectives, highlights the hypocrisy of those who claim to champion human rights. As if that was not enough, a second invasion took place in 2003, based on fabricated claims of Iraq possessing weapons of mass destruction that further devastated Iraq. The West's action not only destroyed the country's infrastructure, but poisoned its land and air, leaving behind a legacy of birth defects and cancers to this day on. Once again, selective enforcement of human rights only served Western interest. During the civil war in Syria, 500,000 Syrians died and millions were displaced. The Assad regime committed atrocities, including the use of chemical weapons. Yet, the West failed to intervene decisively. Why? Because geopolitics trumped humanitarian concerns. Assad's regime was too useful an ally for the West to sacrifice. The ICC and ICJ, institutions meant to uphold justice, remain silent, ineffective, or rather unwilling. The conflicts in Sudan, Yemen, Somalia, list goes on, have marked by severe human rights violations, including atrocities such as civilian massacres, torture, and the targeting of vulnerable populations. Western response to the crisis, inconsistent, drawing criticism for its selective engagement, and in some cases, silence, again dictated by political interest. No example of Western hypocrisy is more glaring than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, now extended to Lebanon. The world is witnessing a genocide taking place, real-time, in the largest concentration camp in the world. despite unprecedented documented human rights violations. The list is too long for me to mention here, but some include, all of you know, illegal settlements, home demolitions, blockades, indiscriminate killing or arrest, torture of men, women, elderly, and mostly children. The West unreservedly continues to back Israel with everything it can, citing Israel has what? The right to defend itself. Meanwhile, the genocide and suffering of Palestinian Muslims is brushed aside as not important, not worthy, and complicated. The ICC, which is quick to investigate other regions, hesitates to act here. Why? Because political ties with Israel are simply too strong. Contrast this with the West's response to the Ukraine war. Russia's invasion was met with swift condemnation, military support, and humanitarian aid for Ukraine. Why is the West so quick to act here, while ignoring crises in places like Palestine, Syria, and the long list? The answer is simple, brothers and sisters. They belong to the West, sharing similar color, values, beliefs, and it fits in with their geopolitical interest. Finally, let's consider Bangladesh, where I come from. Despite its poor and appalling human rights record since it was founded in 1971 by the infamous Mujib, ranging from political suppression to the mistreatment of Rohingya refugees, the West remains largely silent. Why? Bangladesh is strategically important for counterbalancing China's influence and its booming garment industry, second largest in the world, to Western economies. Western companies benefit from cheap labor, so human rights law violations are very conveniently overlooked. The recent ousting of the Bangladeshi dictator Sheikh Hasina on 7th of August 2024 further underscores this hypocrisy. Despite being implicated in human rights violations, crimes against humanity, murder, torture, and despite requests for extradition from India a week ago, Western criticism is muted because of her alignment with Western interest. Let's not forget human rights law at home, even within Western countries, not always attracting global attention and news. Human rights are often applied selectively, especially if they are Muslims, having lived and grew up in the West and practiced. Take the case of our sister Afia Siddiqui, whose ongoing imprisonment is a stark violation of human rights, or the detainees of Camp X-Ray and Guantanamo Bay, whose rights have been trampled for decades, or the hypocrisy of allowing children to biologically change gender while denying a woman the right to wear a headscarf on her head, the hijab. Hypocrisy, intolerance, and double standard. Where is the outcry from the West when the violators are themselves? In the words of Professor of Law Jonathan Hafetz of Seton Hall University, it is the irony of our times that the language of rights is used to legitimize actions that violate those very rights. And in the words of Professor of Constitutional Law Louis Seidman of Georgetown University Law Center, the invocation of rights can often serve as a shield for policies that fundamentally undermine those rights. Just 1 minute, yeah. As we reflect on these inconsistencies of human rights discourse, you might wonder, is there a better way? Is there a framework that does not bend to political pressures or personal desires or treat justice as a tool to serve powerful interests? The answer is yes. Islam offers a powerful, consistent, and deeply rooted alternative that transcends the political expediency we see in the Western world. Islamic human rights are not dictated by political agendas or national interest. They are derived from divine principles. Justice Islam is anchored in the belief that all human beings are created with inherent dignity. As outlined in the Quran, we have honored the son of Adam. This is not a lofty ideal, it is a Sharia obligation. In contrast to Western human rights, which are defined by man and based on human ideals that change according to time and place, Islamic justice, adal, is immutable because it is grounded in divine law. These laws do not change based on who is in power. They apply universally to everyone, regardless of race, religion, status, and is constant through time and place. Ask yourself, would the world not be a better place if our commitment to human rights and dignity was not based on fluctuating geopolitical interest, but on unchanging divine principles? I just want to cite two examples. The Constitution of Medina serves as a timeless model for inclusive governance and respect for human rights. It united Muslims, Jews, and other communities under a framework of justice, mutual respect, and shared responsibility, by guaranteeing religious freedom, equality before the law, and protection for all. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ created a society where the rights of individuals were safeguarded from political whims. Another example of our second Khalif, Umar radiallahu anhu, the Pact of Umar, which protected the rights of non-Muslims living under Muslim rule, guaranteeing the safety, freedom of worship, security of property. Khalif Umar's approach remains an inspiring model today, reminding us that true leadership values and protects the rights of all, irrespective of faith, free from political interest or desires. Ask yourself this question: what human right is better, where the rights are clear, divine, accountability to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a system which is based on man and based on political whims and interest? I will finish with two ayahs from the Quran as a reminder. O you who believe, uphold adal, justice, and bear witness to Allah, even if it is against yourselves, your parents, or your close relatives. Can you imagine a world where leaders, institutions, and individuals adhered to this principle, where justice was not negotiable, but stood firm even when it was costly? It is about collective responsibility. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in a famous hadith, whoever sees an injustice, let him change it with his hand. If he cannot, with his tongue. And if he cannot, then in his heart. And this is the weakest of faith. In conclusion, the narrative as presented by the West must be exposed for what it really is. The West's use of human rights is a political tool, and this has only deepened global injustices and insecurity. The need is great now to push for an understanding of what Islam offered in the past and can offer once again. I will end my talk with this verse. Allah says, but know by your Lord they can have no faith until they accept you, Muhammad, as the judge in all their disputes and find no resistance within themselves against your decision and submit wholeheartedly. I'd like to thank Brother Mustafa and Imla for arranging this conference, and I hope this presentation was productive. We can take questions at Q&A. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.